The ceiling in that emergency room had no warmth in it at all, just flat white, the kind that gives you nothing to look at and nothing to hold on to. My left hand had a monitor clipped to my finger, and the machine beside me beeped every few seconds, steady and not caring one bit about what I was going through. I stared up at that ceiling and thought, this is a strange place to finally slow down. I reached for my phone. No missed calls from Hudson. One text from Melissa sent 40 minutes after the ambulance had already brought me in. Hope you are okay. We are in the middle of something. I read it. Put the phone down. Picked it up and read it again. Have you ever read a sentence and just kept waiting for it to mean something different than it does? It never did. If you are new here, please subscribe before I keep going. I share stories like this one every week, and I would love for you to be part of it. My name is Lucy Green. I am 66 years old, and I live in a small house on the north side of Clarksville, Tennessee, close enough to the Cumberland River that on quiet mornings I can hear it if the wind is right. I want to say this clearly before anything else. I am okay now. I am not telling this story because I am bitter or because I want anyone to feel sorry for me. I am telling it because for a long time I thought what happened was somehow my own fault, and I do not believe that anymore. And I have a feeling someone watching this right now might need to hear that too. To understand why I was lying in that hospital room alone, I have to go back a ways. Lucas and I started Green Tax and bookkeeping in 1994 out of the back room of our house. One folding table, a used filing cabinet, and a printer that jammed every single tax season for 27 years without fail. Lucas handled the clients. He had a way with people, easy and warm, the kind of person who remembered your kid's name and your dog's name, and whatever it was you were worried about last spring, I handled the books. We were a good team, maybe the best team I have ever been part of, and I did not fully understand how much I had relied on that until it was gone. The office we eventually moved into on Commerce Street became something real in this town. People trusted us. We knew their businesses, their worries, their slow years, and their good ones. That building smelled like coffee in the mornings and like old paper the rest of the day. And I loved it the way you love something you built from nothing, which is a different kind of love than most. When Lucas was diagnosed, it was February. He was gone by June, 4 months, which is not enough time for anything except grief. I sold the business side to my former partner, but I kept the building. The monthly rent from tenants was enough to live quietly on, and quiet was all I needed right then. Hudson had married Melissa about a year before Lucas passed. Her family had a name in Clarksville, the kind that comes up at church fundraisers, and the golf club in the same sentence. The wedding was at a big church, and the reception was somewhere nice. I wore my best dress and sat toward the back because the front rows had been arranged for Melissa's side. I told myself that was just how these things go. It was his day. I was not going to make it about me. And looking back now, I think I had already made a habit of that. Not making things about me, even when maybe I should have. About a year after the wedding, Hudson told me he wanted to start a landscaping company. He said he needed a co-signer on a few loan documents, just a formality. The bank required it. And then he said, Lucas always helped me like this, Mom. I thought about Lucas. I said yes. Does that surprise you? That a mother would just say yes to that? It should not. Most of us would. For 3 years after that, Hudson came to me with paperwork. Loan documents, bank forms, signature pages with little sticky flags on them pointing to the lines where I was supposed to write my name. I always signed. And I want to be honest here because honesty is the only real point of telling a story like this. I was not confused about what I was looking at. I had spent 27 years reading financial documents for other people, catching their errors, explaining the fine print to clients who did not want to read it themselves. I understood those pages well enough. I signed them anyway because he was my son, And because somewhere in the back of my mind, I kept hearing something that sounded like Lucas saying, "Help him, Lucy." So I helped. Then one afternoon, Hudson came over with a file thicker than usual. He sat down at my kitchen table and walked me through it. The way you explain something to someone you have already decided is going to agree. The bank he was working with was a small community bank on the east side of town, one where Hudson had built up a relationship with the branch manager over the years, and they had been less formal about paperwork than the bigger institutions would have been. He said this time they needed a real asset as backing, something with actual weight, to secure a larger equipment loan. He said using the office building on Commerce Street made the most sense. He said it was just on paper, that nothing would really change, that the building was still mine in every way that mattered. The print was small. There were a lot of pages. I read what I could and then I signed. After that, things went quiet. Hudson stopped calling just to check in. Melissa left my texts unread for days, sometimes longer. I told myself they were busy. New business, new marriage. I did not want to be the kind of mother who needed constant attention. Then, one afternoon, I was driving back from the grocery store, just an ordinary Tuesday, and I happened to go down Commerce Street. I glanced over at my building out of habit and saw a new sign in the front window. Clean logo, private medical clinic, a name I had never heard of. I sat at the red light and looked at it a moment longer than I probably should have. Then I called Hudson. He picked up on the third ring. There was a pause before he said anything, just a beat too long. He told me he had let them use the space temporarily, just a little extra income, nothing I needed to worry about. I asked where the rent was being deposited. He said he would look into it. I never heard back, and nothing ever showed up in my account. I let it sit for a few weeks. I was good at letting things sit. Then I heard from two women at church that Melissa's parents were throwing a big anniversary dinner, the kind of event where half the town gets an invitation and the other half hears about it secondhand. I called Hudson that evening and asked if I should bring anything. He went quiet. Then I heard shuffling, and Melissa came on the line. Her voice was pleasant, the way a closed door is pleasant. She said, "Lucy, we thought it would be more comfortable to keep this dinner to immediate family on both sides." "You understand, right?" One sentence. No lead up, no apology, just that and a small silence waiting for me to say, "Of course." I said, "Of course." Then I hung up. I drove home. I sat down at the kitchen table and stayed there until the windows went dark. I did not cry. I just sat with it all, the papers I had signed, the phone calls I had not pushed back on, all the small moments where I had chosen to look the other way. That night I felt something in my chest that was not quite pain, just a heaviness that had been there a long time and had finally gotten tired of being ignored. The next morning I was reaching for the coffee maker when my legs went out from under me. I came to on the kitchen floor. My neighbor Carol had seen me through the window and called 911. By the time I understood what was happening, I was already in the back of an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctor used the words stress-induced cardiac event. He said my blood pressure had been dangerously high, probably for longer than I wanted to admit. He said they needed to keep me for 48 hours to monitor things. A nurse came in later and asked gently if I would like her to call someone for me. I picked up my phone. I looked at Melissa's text one more time. Then I set the phone face down on the blanket and told the nurse, "No, thank you, I am fine." I heard my own voice say it and I knew it was a lie. But it was also the first time in years that I had really heard my own voice at all, and that felt like something, even there. So, I came home from the hospital on a Thursday afternoon. The house was quiet, a little too warm, the way a place feels when it has been closed up without you. I moved slowly. The doctor had told me to rest, and I was trying to listen to him for once. But my mind had not slowed down at all. The whole time I was lying in that bed, I kept turning something over. A thing Lucas had said near the end, something about the building, about making sure I would be taken care of no matter what. I had not paid close enough attention at the time. I was too busy trying not to fall apart. I went to the back bedroom. Against the far wall, there is a gray metal filing cabinet, 2 drawers, nothing special. Lucas and I had used it for years when we still worked from home. After we moved to Commerce Street, I just left it there, full of old records neither of us had ever gotten around to sorting through. I had not opened it since the week after the funeral. I pulled out the bottom drawer. Near the back, behind a folder of old tax returns, was a plain white envelope. Lucas's handwriting on the front. It said, "For Lucy, office building, important, keep." My hands were not steady when I opened it. Inside was a short letter from a man named Frank Okafor, an estate and property attorney Lucas and I had used for 2 real estate closings a long time ago. Attached behind the letter was a set of legal documents. At the top of the first page were the words "transfer on death deed." The deed was for the office building on Commerce Street, signed and notarized in the spring of 2018. More than a year before Lucas ever knew he was sick. I sat down on the edge of the bed and read it twice. The deed stated clearly that upon Lucas's death, ownership of the building would pass directly to me. No probate, no other signatures required. It would simply become mine the moment he was gone. What kind of man thinks to do something like that, quietly, without ever saying a word about it? I called Frank Okafor's office the next morning. He was still practicing, still at the same address. When I said Lucas's name, his voice warmed immediately. He told me Lucas had called him one evening and said he wanted to make absolutely certain the building could never be taken from me, whatever happened. Frank had filed the deed at the county recorder's office himself and mailed me the copy with a note to keep it somewhere safe. He said Lucas had been very clear and very calm about the whole thing, like a man who had already made his decision and just needed it done right. Frank explained the legal situation plainly. The deed had been properly recorded before Lucas died, which meant that from the moment Lucas passed, that building belonged to me under Tennessee law. Hudson had never held legal ownership of it. Any loan he had taken out, using the building as collateral, was based on an asset he had no legal authority to pledge. Because the community bank had relied on Hudson's own representations and moved quickly without ordering a full title search. The recording had been missed entirely during their loan process. Frank said that kind of oversight was not unheard of at smaller institutions, especially when the borrower had an existing relationship with the branch. The bank, he said, would need to know about this right away. He offered to contact them on my behalf. I told him to go ahead. Before I put the phone down, I called Bev Langley, the woman renting the office space. She was surprised to hear from me. I asked her one thing: where had she been sending the rent? She said she had been depositing it into an account Hudson had set up when they signed the lease. She said she had assumed I asked him to handle collections. She said, "Lord, Lucy, I had no idea. I believed her completely. I did not call Hudson. I did not text Melissa." I went to the kitchen, found a yellow legal pad in the drawer next to the stove, and sat down. I started writing. Every document I had signed, every date I could remember, every phone call I had not followed up on. My handwriting was shaky at first. By the 3rd page, it had settled back into itself, the same steady lines I had used for 27 years of other people's books. There is something grounding about writing things down. Like the page cannot lie to you the way memory sometimes does. Frank called back 2 days later. The deed had been recorded correctly, exactly filed it. He had spoken with the bank. A meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at his office. He would handle the legal framing. He just needed me there with everything I had. Then he told me something I had not asked about. In a town as small as Clarksville, Frank said, certain things have a way of coming out, and in the course of his conversations around this matter, He had heard that before Hudson ever came to me with the first loan document, he had privately borrowed $80,000 from Melissa's father. The loan was meant to help Hudson prove himself financially, to show Melissa's families that he was capable of building something on his own. He had been paying that back while simultaneously trying to keep his business running, and at some point the numbers had simply stopped working. He had not started out with a plan to take anything from me. He had started out ashamed and desperate, and too proud to ask me honestly for help. I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. It did not erase what he had done, but it made it human, which somehow made it worse and easier to carry at the same time. I thought about Lucas in Frank Okafor's office in 2018, alone, signing a deed he never once mentioned to me, sealing it in an envelope, putting it somewhere he trusted I would eventually find. He had known something. Not about Hudson specifically, maybe, but about the world and what it sometimes does to the people you love, and about what you can do quietly to protect the person who matters most to you. The meeting was Tuesday. Hudson had been told only that there was a property matter requiring his attention. He arrived without Melissa, without a lawyer of his own, carrying the easy posture of someone who expects to walk into any room and already know how it ends. Frank Okafor's conference room is small and plain. A rectangular table, 4 chairs, a window that looks out onto a parking lot. I arrived early and sat with my hands folded on the table and waited. The bank representative came in a few minutes later, a quiet man in a gray jacket who set a folder in front of him and did not say much. Frank sat at the head of the table. Then Hudson walked in. He looked around the room, gave me a small nod. I nodded back. Frank set the transfer on death deed in the center of the table and walked through it the way a man who has done this for 40 years walks through a legal document. Clearly, methodically, without any particular feeling. He explained when it was signed, how it was recorded, what it meant under Tennessee law. He explained that because the community bank had not conducted a title search before approving the loan, the recording had not come to light until now, and that the bank's own review had confirmed the deed's validity. The bank representative opened his folder and went through several pages. He nodded once, slowly, to himself. Hudson stared at the deed. His face went still in a way I had not seen since he was a child, and realized something had gone wrong that he could not talk his way out of. He started to speak. He said my name. He said he had not known about that document, that he had thought. I let him get that far. Then I said his name back to him, and I told him I believed he had not started with a plan. I meant that, but I also told him that he had taken the rent from my building month after month and never said one word to me about it. I said it the way I would have read a number off a client's ledger, not loud. Just true. Just sitting there on the table between us where it could not be taken back. He did not answer. There was nothing to answer. The paper in the center of the table had already said everything that needed saying. The bank confirmed they would open a full review of the loan. Frank noted that Bev Langley had documented every payment she had made, and that those funds would need to be accounted for. Hudson left without the thing he had walked in believing he held. I watched through the window as he sat in his truck in the parking lot for a few minutes before he finally drove away. I did not feel like I had won something. I felt like something very heavy had been set down that I had been carrying for a long time without admitting how much it weighed. In the weeks after that, the bank restructured the loan and removed the building from the collateral entirely. Hudson had to find another way to cover what he owed. Melissa's father, who had privately lent Hudson that $80,000 and believed it was being handled responsibly, learned the full picture of what had actually happened with his money. I do not know exactly what was said in that house. I only know that the pressure which had been pointed outward for years suddenly had nowhere left to go. About a week after the meeting, Hudson called me in the evening. His voice was different, quieter and smaller somehow. He asked if we could talk. I told him we could, but not that day. I told him I would listen when he was ready to tell me the truth about all of it. Then I said good night and ended the call. I stood at the kitchen window for a moment afterward, just looking out at nothing in particular. I did not feel like I had won anything. I felt like I had finally stopped losing, which is not the same thing at all. The following month, I sold the building. Fair market value, proper listing, my name the only name on every document. The money came to me. I found a small house on the north side of Clarksville, right off a road that follows the Cumberland River. The first time I drove out to look at it, I realized Lucas and I had been on that same stretch of road dozens of Sunday afternoons over the years, just driving with nowhere particular to be. We used to slow down along that part, and one of us would say, "Imagine if we lived here." Every single time. Like a small private joke we kept meaning to do something about and never did. I called Dolores the evening I signed the closing papers. She is my younger sister and she lives in Memphis, and we had let 4 years go by without a real conversation between us. She answered on the second ring and sounded exactly like herself, and something in my chest loosened in a way I had not expected. She asked when I was finally going to come down to visit. I asked if the following week would work. She laughed and said she had been waiting years for me to ask that question. I also signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. I had been meaning to do it since roughly 1998, which tells you something about how long I had been waiting for permission that was never going to come from anywhere but myself. My first painting was genuinely bad. The colors went everywhere they were not supposed to go. The instructor came by, looked at it for a moment, and said, "Good. That is exactly how it is supposed to start." I still do not fully understand why that hit me as hard as it did, but it did. I do not know where Hudson and I will end up. He is still my son. That part has not changed, and it will not change. But I learned something that year that I think Lucas had understood long before I did. Loving someone while slowly disappearing from your own life is not devotion. It is just a quiet way of getting lost, and it can go on for years before you end up on a kitchen floor wondering how you got there. I still think about that envelope. Plain white, Lucas's handwriting on the front, sitting in the back of a filing cabinet drawer for 5 years just waiting. He signed that deed alone and filed it and never said a single word about it to me. He just made sure. That is the kind of quiet, steady thing he always did, and I did not appreciate it nearly enough when he was here. I think that deed was the last real thing he ever said to me, not in words. In property law, of all things, do not let anyone take what is yours. Not for any reason, not even for love. Have you ever signed something because you trusted the person handing it to you and later wondered if you should have read it more carefully? If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And there is a new story here every week.